I don't like days like today, but people have a life sometimes. So, and that life is outside of our church. So, let's do this. Nick, I don't need you back there. So if you could add to the crowd, that would be a blessing. So I'm not teaching the 20 pews. Yeah, let's take a seat. We're here. Yeah, that's fine. Morning service is different. I do want to go over some things. There are some family fun night invite cards at the back. This is a really, if you know family with kids, I mean, who doesn't want a fun night with their family? So invite some folks you know who have children. Encourage them to pre-register. And then, Robert, if you could, during the Children's Church Hour, promote this to the kids, get them to talk to their parents about it. Even the church kids need that reminder, I think. And so that would be good. So let's promote this, talk about this. So Family Fun Night's coming up. We also really could use volunteers. So if you're in town at all, man, we really could use your help. We definitely need it. And we want this event to be a way to reach out to the community and minister to the community. So be sure to sign up for that. Also, on May 31st, I put it like I have a lisp, I guess, in the bulletin. May 31st in the bulletin. But if you can be mindful, we'll have communion together as a church family. That would be a good Sunday to obviously be here as we celebrate communion together. We'll have a family Sunday that week, and so that will be a Sunday that we won't have children's church, and so we'll just gather together on that Sunday, all the people in one room. And then there is a ladies' activity coming up, but since basically everyone in here is a man, we don't need to go over that. But if you have a wife, you should let her know about that if she's not here this morning to hear about it. And then don't forget, after the morning service, we have our members' meeting. And Shelby, sometimes you can talk to Shelby if you need nursery for that, but we'll be working through finalizing, doing some membership list business, as well as a brief review of the finances for the church. So if you could stick around after that, that would be super important, I think. I will dismiss you, and we'll have 5-10 minutes of just mingling together, fellowship, because I don't want to just run into a business meeting and make people feel awkward, and I think it's important for us to greet our guests before we start a business meeting. So be mindful of those things, okay? That's all the announcements for today. I want us to jump into the lesson this morning as we continue our study of Christians at work. So let me have you answer this. We've got 4 people who have jobs in the room, so we're going to all 4 of us answer. And answer this specific to your job, or maybe other jobs you've had as well. What are some things that give meaning and importance to our job? So someone said to you, why is your job important? Or what makes you feel like you're doing a job that is important to society? What would be your answer to that? Someone start us off this morning. What are some things that make our job important or feel important? That's right. So we provide food. Good. What else? I'm going to go red. What else? What are some other reasons that give importance to your jobs? Yeah, so when people want your help, good. What else gives meaning and importance to our jobs? Okay, so impact people. Robert, what about you? What makes you feel like your job is important on a week-to-week basis? What reassures you that what you're doing is somewhat valuable? Right? Yeah. So healthcare going forward, right? If your doctor doesn't have a computer, he can't really log your symptoms or anything, or probably process a prescription. Yeah, so or bill, these are very important things, right? Let me ask you this. So I want you to think about your week-to-week tasks. What are some things that you do, and everyone has this in their job, right? I mean, there's no one who's exempt from feeling like they're not doing anything valuable, right? All of us have parts of our job that feel and are more crucial, right? They're the things that make like a job description list. And then all of us have things that we have to do because, well, that one guy got fired and they haven't hired a replacement, or, paperwork. So I want you to think of your week. This will be fun. What are the most mundane, boring, unimportant things you do in your job? What are the most boring, mundane, unimportant things you do in your job? I'll answer for me. I hate watering the flowers out front. I have actually failed the last few weeks. They were a little more sensitive than the last flowers you got. I hate watering, right? Doesn't really feel like I'm accomplishing much important things, we have a pastor. Well, he's watering flowers. It doesn't feel like the most important thing in my job. What about you guys? What are some of those mundane, boring, kind of have to do, but it wouldn't ruin everything if I didn't do them, it feels like? What are some of those things for you guys? What's that? Your company mailbox? Oh, your inbox. Oh, goodness, yeah. The dreaded inbox. Absolutely. So the inbox, managing email. Holy cow. Some of y'all, you live in your email. Some of you are thankful you have a job that you don't have to live in email. What else? Setting up stuff, yep, good. Computer training. Let's just put training, right? Like, what employees like, yes, training. This is the most important part of my life right here, right? Sid, what about you? You fix airplanes, you make sure people don't fall out of the sky, but there's probably parts of your job that feel really, really unimportant. What would that look like in your work? Filling out logbooks. Yep. You're like, why does the FAA need this? Yeah, good. What else? Anyone else? Adam, what about you? What's that? Oh, yeah. So stale food, dealing with stale food. Yeah, you're like, wow. What were you going to say, Ben? Yeah. I don't know why I went to green. Unnecessary reports. Like, do they read these things? Yeah. Everyone I know who works in a corporate environment is like, I have to send out this email. Do people actually read it? Absolutely. Yep. So there's a lot of things in all of our jobs that feel incredibly unimportant, right? And what I want to talk about this morning is that no matter who you are, no matter what job you do, and I would say there's various ways in which I think every job represented in this room is really important, like customers or the society would miss what a lot of you do. But everybody feels like their job or parts of their job are unimportant at times, right? Like, why does this matter? And then not only just think about unimportant to your workplace, your business, right? But if you add to that thinking about your job in light of God, I'm sure none of you are like, wow, I'm really serving the Lord right now when I clear out my inbox. I'm really, at times, I'm really serving the Lord right now when I'm dealing with this stale food, at the gas station, right? There's so many things that we do that feel really unimportant. And no matter who you are, no matter what job you have, all of us can feel like our jobs are unimportant, right? The CEO at times, the high-ranking leader, sometimes feels like they're playing with numbers all day, and they don't actually touch the customer or the people in their company. And yet there's people who are at the bottom of the food chain, at the manufacturing plant, that seems like they're just a cog in a wheel, and they don't really do anything that really makes a huge impact. And spiritual priorities the same way, right? For some of you, you think, well, the pastor gets to do all the spiritual important work, but sometimes I'll just be honest with you, the pastor feels like he's insulated from people. And I know many pastors like, man, if I could just have a regular job, maybe I'd make more impact that way, right? So all of us feel like we're unimportant at times. But last week, Ben introduced to us one word that summarizes what God expects from us in all of our jobs. Ben's lesson focused around one word that if we can shift our mindset towards that one word in our jobs, it might reframe, repackage how important what we do is. Now, Ben's exempt from answering this question because he taught the lesson. So I want to ask you all to answer this question. What was the one word, main word that came out in Ben's lesson that summarizes what success looks like in the workplace? What was the one word we talked about last week? Thank you, Robert. Faithfulness, right? And what I want to do is I want to take what Ben did and I want us to drive it home. Maybe the way to think about it is Ben talked about the principle. Today I want to talk about the specific application. That if you and I think about our jobs with a mindset of faithfulness, what I want to show you today, I want to prove to you, is this. That a mindset of faithfulness, and this is not in your handout, but it's worth writing down. This is what I want to prove to you. A mindset of faithfulness means that all of your job matters to God. When you approach your job with a mindset of faithfulness, it changes how we view our work to show that all of our job matters to God. The important, impactful stuff, but also the really unimportant stuff, can be changed, and we can realize that God actually cares about this. And that's why I titled the lesson this: your work is important to God. So no matter what you do, whether it feels unimportant or important, if you approach it with a mindset of faithfulness, it will change and show you how everything you do is important to God. And I want to give you 5 ways, 5 things God cares about in your work. Here's the first one. Your work matters to God because it is an expression of your love for God and your love of neighbor. Your work matters no matter what you do, and I want to prove this. Your work matters because it's an expression of your love for God and your love for your neighbor. Many of us are familiar with what Jesus taught was the greatest commandment. And what I want you to see is that if the greatest commandment is these 2 things, then here's what we can assume. That the greatest commandment applies to everything, right? So Jesus, when he's summarizing, he's being asked in Matthew 22, really his opponents are trying to stump him, and they say, oh, Jesus, we know there's 500 commands in the Torah. Tell us what the most important one is. Well, if you've read the Torah, right, there's a lot of laws. Like crazy niche laws about how you treat your neighbor's goat and how you deal with, when your bull accidentally rams someone and hurts them. So the law is encompassing all of society, and so Jesus is summarizing all of those laws with 2. Do you think it's a fair assumption that if Jesus is saying that these 2 laws summarize the Torah, then this means that Jesus also thinks these 2 laws summarize how we should approach our work? Does that make sense? I mean, if the Torah covers how you should treat your neighbor's goat, then we should assume that these 2 laws also apply to your workplace and how you work. And what are the 2 laws? The first one is that you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. In other words, your work matters, listen very carefully, because your work is an expression of your love for God. And I want to prove this to you because remember last week, Ben taught us from Colossians 3:23. And here's what Colossians 3:23 teaches. And Ben told us that when we work, we need to think of ourselves as working for a new master. Here's what Colossians 3 says. Whatsoever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men. Now that's surprising, isn't it? Because all of you report to a boss if you have a career. You have a direct report, right? You report to a supervisor, a boss, an agency, whatever the case may be. And Colossians 3 says, whatever you do, do it to the Lord and not unto men. In other words, everything you do, you have another person you report to. Not just your manager, not just your supervisor, you report to God, right? And he says, not only does your boss pay you, but God rewards you, knowing that of the Lord ye shall receive the reward of the inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Christ. So how can our ordinary jobs be a function of loving our extraordinary God, right? How can sweeping the floors at Tyson, discarding stale food at a gas station, clearing your inbox at your office job, how can those things be an expression of love for God? Well, if God has commanded you to be faithful in the little things, then you can do that for him. If God has commanded you to serve your master as if you're serving the Lord, then if your employer wants you to do those little unimportant things, then they ultimately matter to God. Secondly, Jesus teaches us that our work is a way of loving our neighbor. Our work is a way of loving our neighbor. And honestly, I want you to think for a moment of how all of your jobs are a way of loving your neighbor. I mean, I'm looking out, I know every one of your vocations. All of you have a job that is a way of loving your neighbor, right? Well, here's two ways your work can be, or maybe three, how you can love your neighbor in your work. First of all of you, I could argue, do a job that is a way of loving your neighbor in society. Like you're adding something to society, right? So Rick is loving his neighbor by properly following rules at Tyson so that he doesn't contaminate the meat, right? Because it ain't loving to make my meat nasty, right? Not loving at all. Mark, who's out of town today, is loving his neighbor in society by making sure the utilities in Cimarron are being paid to the bigger utility suppliers so that in Cimarron they have utilities, right? But you also love your neighbor not just by contributing to society in the ways that your job does that, but listen very carefully. Here's why your job matters to God. Because if you do your job well, you are saving your neighbor from having a harder life, right? All of you, you know this. How many of y'all know what it's like when your job gets harder because someone else is slacking off, right? Someone else shows up late. Someone else doesn't do their job on the shift before you. Someone else on your line at Tyson isn't going as they need to, right? So one way we love our neighbor in our job and why it matters to God, because remember, Jesus is the one who commanded us to love our neighbor as ourselves. So if everything you do is a way of lightening the load of others who would have to pick up the slack for you, then friends, everything you do matters to God, right? You love your neighbor by not burdening them. So you love your coworker by making sure they don't pick up the slack because you're lazy on your shift. You love your employee by making sure the expectations on them are clear. You love your boss by doing your job well so he doesn't get in trouble with his boss. But then on top of that, at your work, on top of just your normal job duties, you have another opportunity to love your neighbor. You can love your neighbor at your job because your job, listen very carefully, when Jesus says love your neighbor as yourself, he's not just talking about your next door neighbor, right? It's a general term that encompasses all of the people you know personally. And by the way, Jesus in Luke would teach who our neighbor is. It's not just people we know deeply, but also people we encounter passing by us, right? The Good Samaritan. He didn't know the guy who got beat up on the side of the road, he passed by them and he became his neighbor by just seeing him in distress. So here's why your job matters to God, because when you accept the job, here's what you're doing. You have automatically expanded who the neighbors are in your life that you're commanded to love. And you don't just love them by doing your job well, though you should. You don't just love them by contributing to society. You love your neighbor. You should be looking for ways, friends, as you have neighbors at your job, to love them above and beyond what you're asked to do at work. Let me give you some examples. We love our coworkers by genuinely caring about their needs outside of work. Right? We love our coworkers by ministering to them as they're hurting. You know how it is. As you work with someone long enough, generally, though there's a few office recluses, we generally get to know whether our coworker is going through a divorce, whether their kid is sick because they're taking a lot of PTO, whether they've had a bad day. And so, friends, the reason why your job matters to God is because in the in-between moments of your work, you have opportunities to love your neighbor as yourself and reflect the love of Jesus Christ, the one who perfectly loved his neighbor. So your work matters to God because you can love God and love your neighbors through it. Everything you do at your job matters to God, because if we're going to approach our work with the mindset of I'm going to be faithful to the Lord, it demands that we love God through our work and we love our neighbor through our work. But here's the second reason your work matters to God. And this is going to be surprising to you that this is even on the handout for some of you considering your jobs. God cares about you working for enjoyment. Some of you are like, what? Work? Enjoy? Pastor, what kind of world do you live in, right? But I think we've seen this in Ecclesiastes, haven't we? It's so funny to me. Ecclesiastes is the book most people assume is like down on life. But Ecclesiastes, probably like 6 or 8 times, is like enjoy life, love it. Enjoy it. It's all you got in some ways. And so our God actually cares about you enjoying the life he's given you. 1 Timothy 6, really in the context of material blessings, says a general principle about God, that he has given us richly all things to enjoy. Do you see that at the end? This is speaking to rich people, and in the midst of a warning to not trust in riches, right? So we can all have a bad relationship with our jobs and our money. It can be idolatrous. But Paul says, I also want to cover the other side, that you should be willing to enjoy this. So he's talking to rich people, and he doesn't say to rich people, you have to give away all your money or you're a terrible person. He actually says, God has given you your money to enjoy as well. Ecclesiastes 5, speaking of our labor in life, says this, it is good and it is comely for one to eat and to drink and enjoy the good of all of his what? Enjoy the good of what? All right, let's try it one more time. To enjoy the good of what? Labor, that's right. Meaning that what you do in the office, it is good for you to enjoy it. Now, I know there's parts of your job that you don't enjoy, but I just want you to think about the grace of this, okay? I bet you all of you some of you have jobs that you probably have more drudgery to them than others. I recognize that. But here's what I want you to think about. Remember our first lesson. God has cursed our toil. And one of the ways God has cursed our toil is he's made it feel meaningless at times. See, the word toil literally means that you put in effort and it doesn't produce results. But I want you to think about this. God is so good that in the midst of your cursed work, he has given you enjoyment that you can have. And friends, I just want to say, I know many of you don't often ask me about my background before I'm a pastor, but I've worked very ordinary jobs, okay? And so I think I can speak with a position of experience from this, though not as many years as some of you. Even in low-profile, mundane jobs, God can give you enjoyment in those things. Our God is so merciful that in a job that is under the curse of sin, he can give us joy. What a blessing. I wonder this morning, I just want to challenge you. Do you ever experience enjoyment in your work? Or is every day a drudgery? Now, again, I don't think it's bad for you to seek out a job that might be more fulfilling and more in line with your gifts and skills. But I also want to challenge you that if you hate everything about your job and you never like it and you never have fun, that maybe part of the problem is not your job, but it might be your heart. A contentment that God has given you. It could be, as Judson challenged us, that we're expecting too much from our jobs. We're expecting, this is the lie that I was taught as a kid, that you should go and find your passion and live your dreams, right? And if you do that, then life will be just so great. But what most of us find out as grown adults is, number one, most people don't get to do everything they want, right? That's what we teach our kids. And every job has mundane and boring and not fun things, right? So sometimes I think we're dissatisfied with our work because we're like a kid who kicks his bike because it won't fly. We're expecting our work to give us a sort of joy that only God can give aside from work through Jesus Christ. But I want you to remember that this passage, notice that enjoyment doesn't come from the labor, it comes from God. This is the passage we were in just 2-3 weeks ago. In other words, if you want joy in your work, it's actually not going to come from your work itself, but from God who gives it. Okay? So we can be faithful in our jobs by enjoying them. That's what it looks like to be faithful in your workplace, is to enjoy the glimpses of glory and joy that God gives you, even in the midst of the curse. And we should expect that our job will have both. It'll feel toilsome, it'll feel vanity, but it'll also feel like joy some days. And that's a gift from God that he commands you to enjoy. Number 3, we work to reflect God's character. If you're going to be faithful in your job, all of your job will matter to God when you reflect God's character in the workplace, okay? Now, that idea of reflecting God's character might sound really theoretical to you. How do I reflect his character? I'm not God. We all know how imperfect we are. But I want you to remember what the very first chapter of the Bible tells you, that you are made in the image of God. Literally, you are made as a reflection of God. And really, the whole salvation story, listen, the whole trajectory of the Bible is God made you in his image. That image was broken because of sin, and Jesus, through his salvation, is restoring us more into the image of God by conforming us into his own image. So when you have received Christ as your Savior, I would summarize the main goal of Jesus saving you until the end of the age as this: he's trying to make you more and more into God's image. So faithfulness in your workplace looks like you reflecting God's image in the ways that I want to describe to you. Let me explain it this way. How many of you are familiar with the concept of job shadowing? You know what a job shadow is? Job shadowing is sometimes what kids or college kids do, or sometimes we label it under internship, right? You know what an internship is? It's the greatest way to get free labor in the marketplace, right? An internship is a job shadow, right? You're trying to learn, and the primary point of a job shadow is what? The person's not actually doing the real work, right? If you have a kid who wants to be a doctor and they go job shadow a doctor, they're not out there making sick patients well. But they're following them around, doing parts of the task to learn what that job is like. In a similar way, in reflecting God's image, we are job shadowing, right? Our God is doing the real work, but he is allowing us to participate in pieces of his work and his character that he's restoring in us through the image of Jesus Christ. So God is the ultimate one who sets things in order, right? He's the God of order. God is the one who orders the church, and yet there are pastors who are setting the church in order as well, as I read in Titus 1 this morning. God is the ultimate healer, right? God is the one who makes people well, but he has nurses like Colleen and doctors who participate in his healing work in distributing his grace, really, if we could say it that way, to people, right? And so we get to reflect God's character in many different ways. And I think all of your jobs reflect these in different pieces. So here's how you can reflect God's character in your workplace. Number one, you can reflect God's character by bringing order out of chaos. By the way, this doesn't just apply to jobs, right? All of us have something that occupies our time. We're serving, hopefully, in the community in some way, at our homes. Our homes have operations that need run, right? We have family operations that need run. And so these things apply just as much to a role in the home as it does in the job, in the workplace. God is a God who brings order out of chaos, right? If you read Genesis 1:2, which I won't put on the screen, but Genesis 1:2, what? It says that God saw that the earth was formless and void. And what's interesting in Genesis 1, it's this progression of a formless earth being formed in the first 3 days of creation, and a void earth being filled in the next 3 days of creation. So in other words, the purpose of Genesis 1, like the main thing Genesis 1 is getting across, is that God takes what has no form, no structure, and he structures it. God takes what is empty and void and devoid of life, and he fills it with life. And so we, as people who reflect God, one of the ways you reflect God is by bringing order out of chaos. It's funny how so many of our jobs really are this, aren't they? Like, I think, like, one of the ways many of your job descriptions could be communicated is your job is to bring order out of chaos. You get a shipment of parts, and you're organizing and ordering them, making sure they go to the right places. You have a floor at Tyson that is disorderly, right? I mean, Ben knows this as well as anybody, that order doesn't happen by accident. We have to order things. There's effort that's needed, right? So what are some ways that we bring order to chaos in our jobs? Friends, even ordering your messy inbox is a faint reflection of the glory and the image of God. Remember the end of 1 Corinthians 14, where Paul's giving instructions on the church, and he's concerned that there's disorder in the church, in the way that people are ministering to one another. A good goal, they're ministering, but bad thing, they're ministering in a way that's disorderly. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 14 that God is not the author of confusion, literally of disorder, but of peace. In other words, God characterizes himself as a God of order. Therefore, if you are being made in the image of God through Jesus Christ, you are to have order in your life and be bringing order in the places God has put you. By the way, this should challenge all of us too. Because let's just be honest. Some of us, we do the reverse of this, don't we? Some of us bring a little disorder into our workplaces on a bad day, right? We're the people who don't have our stuff done. We're the people whose workstation is really messy. We're the people who are behind and not prepared for the meeting. And so I think this challenges all of us to recognize that those things that bring order to our workplace are important to God, not just to your boss. You don't just do those to make yourself look better in the eyes of your employees or employer. You do them to reflect God's image. Number two, we reflect God's image by exercising authority well. And I say this to those of you who have any sort of oversight in your workplaces. Some of you don't. But also in your homes, you might have authority that you're exercising. And so we reflect God's image by exercising authority well. And what's interesting is that at the end of 2 Samuel, remember 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel are like a package. They're one story. And what we see in 1 Samuel is bad authority, right? We see Saul, he's a totally messed up king. He actually makes the nation more disordered and more under oppression than they were at the beginning. And David comes in and he restores things. And so there's a lot of intentionality to why 2 Samuel ends with a poem. 1 Samuel started with a poem from Hannah, the barren mother, and it ends with a poem by King David. And his poem is about what authority can be. Now, how many of us would agree authority has fallen on bad times in our society? People despise authority. In fact, I think the idea of authority, even maybe by some people in this room, I would suppose, because all of us are influenced by the culture in various ways, could be a word that we kind of like, it's like putting salt in a wound. Like, I don't want to touch that. How some of you feel about certain vegetables, right? Like, don't talk about authority. Let's talk about, chocolate chips and pancakes, right? But authority is a good thing. Notice how David describes authority in 2 Samuel. It says, then the Spirit of the Lord spake by me, and his word was in my tongue. The God of Israel said, the rock of Israel spake to me, he that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. So this is a command to good authority. But notice the result. When a ruler is just, ruling in the fear of God, he will be like the light of the morning. When the sun riseth, even a morning without clouds, as the tender grass springing out of the earth by clear shining after rain. Do you kind of feel the imagery? Like a beautiful, bright, and cloudless morning where the grass is springing up and the dew is on the grass and life is budding forth. Oddly enough, doesn't verse 3 or verse 4 sound like Genesis 1? Light bursting forth and life coming out of the earth. Here's what David is saying, that when we rule in God's image and we use our authority well, it actually brings life to those under us. Certainly that was the case in David's reign, wasn't it? I think all of us realize that most people reject authority generally because they've had so many experiences with bad authority. Right? Women reject the biblical teaching on authority in the home, though it's a very cooperative authority, I would argue, because maybe they've had bad experience with men who've misused that, and that's a problem. People reject authority in the church because they've had bad experiences with authority in the church. People reject authority at their workplace because they've had a long string of bad bosses. I mean, we see it in jobs all the time. I could tell you of businesses here in town or businesses I've worked with that have long strings of bad management. And it's like, I mean, it would be hard at a time if you've had your fifth boss and the last four were terrible to be like, I'm going to submit and follow this guy's orders because the last four screwed it up, But when you use authority well, I want you to listen. If you're a husband, if you're a leader in your workplace, if you're a dad or a mom, and you use authority well, you are launching a counterattack against the lies of Satan. Because Satan wants to persuade us to reject all authority, and you have an opportunity to present the gospel. Because how many of you would agree, when someone is a good boss, they stand out? It's not normal to have a good boss, is it? Some of you might be fortunate you've had more good bosses than bad, but it's not normal. So when someone's a good leader, they have the opportunity to really reflect the Lord. I got to move on. Here's the next way we can reflect God is by being creative. By the way, this can happen outside the workplace too. Creativity often is the way in which we bring order out of chaos, right? So the first one is we reflect God by bringing order out of chaos. A lot of times the way that creativity shows up is we're coming up with solutions on how to bring order out of chaos, right? We take a chaotic front yard and we landscape it and make it beautiful. We take a chaotic problem at work and we bring solutions to it. We take a messy diagnosis and we bring solutions to it through our creativity. And I think all of us would agree that it feels good to be creative. Why does it feel good? It's because we're faintly reflecting the image of God. Next, and by the way, this provides meaning to every job that brings some sort of paycheck or provision for your family, but we reflect God by providing. And look, everything you do, important or unimportant, at the end of the day, it functions into how much you get paid, right? And so the sum total of what you do is a check, generally. And friends, what I want you to understand is that even if you're a dad or your husband and you work a job that feels really dumb, you feel like you have way more skills than your job taps into, I just want you to know that God is pleased by you being faithful to provide, men and women. That is a good thing in the eyes of our Lord, even if you have to work a job that's not your favorite. Because when God describes himself often throughout scriptures, he's a God who feeds his people. He's a God who puts bread on the table. And when we have the opportunity to do that, we're reflecting the image of our God, right? I mean, how much more of an advantage do your kids and the people who are under your care have if at the very minimum, when they think of a father or a parent, they can think of someone who took care of their needs? That gives them a head start in life of how they think about God. Number 4, we work to adorn the gospel. So why does what you do at your job matters? It matters because you adorn the gospel. Now, I use that word intentionally. It's not a word that we use super commonly in our society, but it's in the text, translated various ways in the New Testament. In Titus 2:10, it shows up. And Titus 2, I just want to orient you to the context of the passage before we read it. Titus 2 is not commanded to bosses. It's not commanded to rich people. I want you to think about the dignity of the New Testament. This passage is written to the people who are the lowest in society, is written to slaves. Now, the New Testament is not seeking to fix all of society's problems. That's outside the scope of the New Testament. What the New Testament is there to do is to instruct people who are living in a broken society. And one of the ways that society is broken at times is they're slaves. But if you're a slave, you should want to honor God as a slave, right? If you're a CEO, you should want to honor God as a CEO. And so this verse is an instruction to slaves. Listen, the most unimportant people in society, culturally speaking. But notice how the language shows them that they serve the most important God with the most important purpose. By not purloining, which is an extremely outdated word that none of us ever use, right? But really, ultimately, purloining is maybe we could call it stealing, right? The CSB translates it that way. I think that's helpful. Maybe a more colorful word that we might use is embezzling, right? Stealing from your workplace. So slaves are commanded not to embezzle, but to show all good fidelity, to be faithful. That's literally the word that was the lesson last week, right? Be faithful in your jobs. Why should they not embezzle and why should they be faithful? So that they may adorn the doctrine of God our Savior in all things. Notice that last word. What parts of our job do we get to adorn the gospel? All things. The word adorn is a word you would use for jewelry. So, for example, I don't know if you noticed, I felt really awkward about the last few months, but I didn't have a wedding ring for several months because my wedding ring shattered. And Shelby and I were able to go get it melted down and made into a new ring lately. What does a wedding ring do? Well, a wedding ring doesn't make me married. It doesn't constitute my marriage, but it adorns. It draws attention, right? So I felt awkward. I was like, I am married, even though I'm not, like, bringing attention to it, right? So now with a ring, I have the opportunity to, like, draw attention. Hey, I'm committed to my wife. And in the same way, when you work faithfully at work, here's what you're doing. Your character can draw attention to the gospel. You're not making the gospel better. In the same way, my ring doesn't make me more married, but what you can do by being a faithful employee who doesn't steal from your master. By the way, stealing is not just taking supplies off the shelf. It's by messing around on the clock, right? By being a faithful employee, you draw attention to the doctrine of our God and our Savior. Last way we reflect our masters by working for money. And really, this goes back to providing. It's good to work for money. It's not good to live for money. But Ephesians 4:28 says this, similarly to our last passage, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing that is good, that he may have to give to him that needs. Why is it good to work for money, friends? Because not only is it good to provide for your family, but notice, look, he's not commanding us to work so that we can just provide for our needs. The gospel call is for you to make money so you can take care of your needs, but also so that you can give to those who have less. This is why giving to our church is important. We'll talk about this a little bit, but our church has had the ability to support those who need in our membership. That's why it's good for you to give to your local church. The gospel, by the way, doesn't just make you a hard worker, it makes you a generous worker to provide for the needs of people, right? So here's my goal. With a mindset of faithfulness, all of your job matters to God. And it matters because of these 5 things. So I hope that God will invigorate you with passion and purpose this week in your jobs. Lord, thank you for the purpose that you give to our lives by this mindset of faithfulness. I pray you'd help us to live faithfully in our jobs so that we may adorn the gospel. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, church family, you are dismissed. All right, we'll fellowship together. Be sure to sign up for Family Fun Night to help. We really need the help. And fellowship, greet one another, and we'll reconvene in a few minutes. You're dismissed.